The context is obviously within, BC and Alberta and Canada. There's really unfortunate with the number of wildfires and just the really unfortunate situation with climate change. So obviously Alberta is super focused on, using technology and innovation to better address this type of societal concerns and issues. The predictions on that Friday in May was actually all red. That very moment, actually thought maybe there was a bug or something wasn't working right. But it was actually, the whole province was actually on fire at that time. And then a few days later, during that weekend, Alberta actually declared a state of emergency. So, reflecting back, I think, I could work in commercial or other domains, but really in public sector, that really demonstrated to me the importance of AI and technology to help really address this type of really important societal, challenges.
I was talking to somebody else in another podcast on how do you motivate young, good data scientists to work on your projects. And one of the things they were saying was because in public sector, you're working on such impactful things, right? So this is one big motivation factor, and this is one factor that helps us recruit some of the top people, people like Hubert to work on. Fourth one that you said is that the search kind of worked okay in its own context. The LLM did it okay in its own context, but the two of them together, there was a gap. So if you had searched for what is the population of in Alberta or something, and a human would have seen 10 blue links, and they would have clicked on the first link, and then they say that in 2015 the population is 60,000, right? And the human would have known that this is 2015, so I understand that the search is fine, so let me go to the second document, because human knows that context of going. And what you're saying is that sometimes there is this some things falling in the middle of retrieval and generation, where retrieval is doing its own thing, generation is doing its own thing, but that context is not properly passed. So that's the fourth kind of failure.
Right? Doesn't solve all types of questions, right? So when you look at questions which are aggregations, and you're saying, a very classic example is you got a bunch of documents, and the question could be, how many times is the word Hubert mentioned in my document? So Reg's gonna retrieve your top in, right? The top number, but it's not all your documents. So it's
correct.
But it's gonna answer based on the retrieved documents. It's mentioned 20 times, but that's definitely not the right answer, right? So looking at, there's just some certain types of questions that just cannot be answered by Reg. So recognizing that is going to be important.
Limitation of Reg.
Agent to agent communication, that's a big bet that Microsoft we spoke to most of our competitors and just the the AI tech industry. But I think what my bold prediction is, we're gonna build out a public sector centric agent to agent kind of framework that may differ from commercial, right? Because if you think about it with agentic AI, you're in the commercial side, there's people are thinking about advertisements, how do you commercialize it? So the business case for public sector is not the same. I don't know if I have a bold specific prediction, but I think I want to kind of help contribute to some sort of kind of framework about agentic AI, agent to agent communication that's really beneficial for public sector. So I think that's something that I'm excited about.
I really like that. So you're thinking each public sector entity would have an agent which almost is like their storefront or their website, and then the other public sector has another one, and then let's say one has to talk to another, one agent needs to know some things within the jurisdiction of another, then these two agents can talk and figure things out.
Welcome to govai.fm, your no-nonsense guide to AI in the public sector. Connect with peers and learn from real successes, failures, and lessons from the trenches.
Okay, so welcome to govai.fm. Today we have with us Hubert. Hubert Duan is a principal cloud solution architect with Microsoft national team, and he's a very good friend, and me and Hubert go back a long way before large language models. Yeah, Hubert, I still remember 2019 or something, and we were having a conversation. I don't know what you remember from that conversation.
Yeah, no, I think we were talking about precision and recall for NLP, but this was pre-large language model days, so I think a lot has changed since then, right?
Yeah, a lot has changed since then, and Hubert has been doing some really great work with a lot of public sector companies, and here we wanted to dip into and learn from some of his experiences and some of the best practices, specifically about Retrieval-Augmented Generation, RAG, and how to make these Retrieval-Augmented Generation systems work. We'll go into, some of you listeners already know what RAG is, some of you are new to it, so we'll go based on first principles, describe everything from the beginning, and have some fun. So, welcome, Hubert. I wanted to start with maybe just to get to know you better. So, what sparked your journey into data science and AI and Microsoft and public sector?
Thank you so much, Gurish. And first of all, I'm super excited to be a part of this podcast. So actually, my journey with AI actually started through data mining. This was about, almost 15 years ago now. That's actually what the industry called it back then. So I was a co-op student at National Defense where I actually learned how to program in R, and I was doing cluster analysis. So doing unsupervised machine learning on short text data. And this was back in 2011. So that actually inspired me to pursue a career in AI. So I actually did my master's in statistical machine learning at the University of Ottawa, and then I joined Microsoft after that through the Microsoft Academy for College Hires program as a data scientist in Redmond. And then I moved back to Canada in 2016, 2017. And then for the last 5 years, I've been based in Ottawa. So I've been working with mostly public sector. And that's actually, Garish, how we met through WorkSafe and now with the City of Vancouver. So I'm based in Ottawa and doing a lot of work, exciting work with the public sector across the country.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that explains a lot of the background. Many data scientists come from like different fields, right? Like some of them are like your background, like data mining and like that kind of background. And some data scientists came from a dev background, right? Like a lot of developers became data scientists later. And some came more from a business background, doing more analytics from spreadsheets and that kind of stuff. So you're the tribe who comes from R and data mining and that kind of stuff. Very good. Okay, awesome. So just to make it real for our audience on what does a day-to-day work look like for somebody in a Canadian national AI team working in public sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say for my role right now as a principal cloud architect, so it's fairly dynamic. So most of my time, say 60-70% of my time is spent working with customers. So I'm based in Ottawa. So I do focus with our federal customers, obviously work with provinces and municipalities and crown corporations as well. So I would say like, the most of my time is directly working with customers through, architecture reviews. I also like to get pretty hands-on, actually build some sort of solutions like, what we did together with City of Vancouver recently. Part of my time is also to really expand our Microsoft AI community of practice. So what I do a few times a year is I organize quarterly AI consortium and meetups. So actually part of my role is to ensure that we're working with our very important public sector teams to actually broadcast and showcase the amazing work they've done through AI to help society. So that's also part of my role. And then of course I also do a lot of kind of mentoring and coaching. So maybe 10-20% of my time is spent working with other cloud solution architects, other folks within Microsoft to kind of help them scale in terms of their kind of day-to-day work. So I kind of bring in that coaching and leadership skills to others as well.
Any formative projects that shifted the way you think about AI? Any aha moments throughout your journey? Any projects that you want to talk about?
I would say, looking back, I've been in the AI industry for about 10 years. I think the one project I'm probably the most proud of was actually in 2023, where the context is obviously within, BC and Alberta in Canada. There's really unfortunate with the number of wildfires and just the really unfortunate situation with climate change. So obviously Alberta is super focused on, using technology and innovation to better address this type of societal concerns and issues. So AlterML is actually one of our AI partners in Canada. So they actually built a wildfire prediction engine with Alberta in 2022. And then in 2023, before the fire start season, I was actually the lead cloud architect at Microsoft who helped Alberta and AlterML operationalize the solution so that wildfire prevention folks could actually use this tool to make data-driven decisions. So I still remember, right? So I helped them take this project to go live, and then the predictions on that Friday in May was actually all red. So I actually thought, because I lived in Ottawa at that time, so actually that very moment, actually thought maybe there was a bug or something wasn't working right. But it was actually literally the whole province was actually on fire at that time. And then a few days later, during that weekend, Alberta actually declared a state of emergency. So, reflecting back, I think, I could work in commercial or other domains, but really in public sector, that really demonstrated to me the importance of AI and technology to help really address this type of really important societal, challenges, right? Like climate change. So I'm really passionate about, using AI to really help with people's lives. So that's really
that is super cool.
I've been in public sector for this many years. Yeah.
That is super cool. That project, all of us who work in public sector know about that Alberta wildfire prediction project, and fantastic job doing that project. And you're so right. I was talking to somebody else in another podcast on how do you motivate young, good data scientists to work on your projects. And one of the things they were saying was because in public sector, you're working on such impactful things, right? Like, so this is one big motivation factor, and this is one factor that helps us recruit some of the top people, some of the people like Hubert to work on.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so as we mentioned earlier in our introduction, you and I started in this machine learning and AI space way before large language models and GenAI and OpenAI and all these things. So a lot of people right now, if they think, oh, AI developer, they think of, oh, large language models and GenAI, right? But yeah, it started much before. So I wanted to see if you can share some reflections on how you saw the advent of LLM. Like we saw GPT-1 and GPT-2 and how you saw that time between 2019 and 2025, or any stories you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Girish, I still remember when we met, right, in that very extensive, but kind of intense workstation meeting about natural language processing, right? But I think before large language models, right, I have this very clear memory because I've had the same conversations with so many customers about how they cannot do something, right? So this very classic example is before November 2022, lots of customers, I think including WorkSafe at that time, asked me, hey, can we use AI to just scan through a policy document or something that's very text heavy? And can we build a chatbot that can just answer questions based on that text, right? Without training it on a very specific frequently asked questions page. So that was actually a really hard problem because text generation was actually very challenging. Even summarization, right? It was, if you recall, it was extractive summarization. So it would just
Yes.
text and then abstracted where it would generate a summary was like mind blowing, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And then now, like 2020, after ChatGPT and GPT 3.5, Retrieval-Augmented Generation literally solved it. So now customers can do this problem that was literally almost impossible a few years ago using, OpenAI models, other large language models in the vector store, right? And they can literally do that in a few hours. So that was really, I saw that was the shift, and that was
Shift.
super exciting. Yeah.
So true, so true. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Same sort of experience. As of 2025, how would you break down the current work? Like what percentage is traditional ML, and Andre Karpathy calls it software 2.0, and what percentage is foundational models and prompt engineering? Like, is there still space for
Yeah.
traditional machine learning, deep learning?
That's another great question, Girish. So I'm a traditional AI ML person, right? I grew up as a data scientist. I did my studies in classical machine learning. So I love that field. I still think lots of problems today can be solved with custom ML, but with the hype, with the demand, with what we're seeing across customers and their peers, I would say it's mostly 75% large language model types of work, 25% traditional. But I think people are putting a bit more emphasis on the generative AI part where there's still a lot of problems and kind of opportunities you could tackle, right? But definitely today, there's more generative AI types of problems for sure. Even though I personally think there's a lot of opportunities for traditional AI and ML still for sure.
That totally resonates with me. With the traditional ML, I see a lot of high business value, but boring things are still done using traditional machine learning, even deep learning, TensorFlow, PyTorch, like those kind of things. Think of like recommender systems or classification systems for a mix of structured and unstructured data. Like your workhorses are still the machine learning, deep learning systems. But the new applications that, like, I think 75%, you said like 25, 75, and that might be more because this LLM has uncovered a lot of new things that we couldn't do before.
Exactly.
And that's why people are experimenting with a lot of these new things. But as I understand from you, there is still a very important space for traditional ML, DL, and how they work. Awesome. Okay. Any specific kind of problems? Like what kind of problems ask for like the traditional way versus what kind of problems you're solving with the LLMs?
Yeah, I would say one part that I've seen, I'm still kind of putting my thought to it, right? Is one idea that I've had actually on this problem is, sometimes a challenge with generative AI is it's harder to explain what the prediction is, right? So if I'm saying I want to do sentiment analysis with generative AI, you say, is this happy or angry, or what's the happiness ratio? It'll make
That's a
something
good
up,
one.
right?
Yeah.
It'll say something, and then you
Yeah.
kind of take it what it is. But what I've seen, I think is starting to emerge is instead of asking a very black and white question, you can come up with a rubric, like a matrix of specific kind of linguistics types of does the speaker have any kind of words that show intent of negativity, or does it have just a certain set of rubric based questions, and those get answered by generative AI, but then you can aggregate that set of rubric based questions, and then you're automatically going to get a confidence score that's actually a ratio that you understand. You can actually explain better about what the prediction, why you predicted. So I'm just thinking like, that type of work using a rubric and kind of a scoring matrix and then aggregating that, we in traditional ML, we call that ensemble learning back in the days. But I think, taking that type of approach and applying it for generative AI types of solutions, I think I've kind
I
of played
see.
around with that. But
I see.
I think, there's more to explore in that with that approach for sure.
Let me maybe try to rephrase what you said, because this is a very important point and I have a similar experience. So what you're saying is we call it generative AI, where it generates things, but like in a lot of ways that it is used, maybe it's a misnomer, because what we are almost doing is we are taking some text, and like you're giving example of a customer giving some feedback, and we are extracting sentiment out of it, right? Like, so we are not necessarily generating. We are like generating almost feels like you give one line and then say, okay, write me a story about this, and then it writes a story. So that's a classic generative. Or give me an image that has this and this, and it gives you an image, right? Here we are taking some text and almost extracting components of it, so converting unstructured text into some sort of a structured data, like you were talking about a rubric and that kind of stuff, right? So it's more like data, like transformative AI. Like it takes text and transforms it into some sort of a structured data. I have the same experience that there are use cases where you need true generation, where like write a story or write a marketing thing or create a resume, like those kind of things. There are some use cases, but a lot more useful, high value use cases are not having generative AI do generation, but actually generative AI creating some sort of a structured data or rubric, as you say.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then now you can kind of take that rubric and then apply behind that, because you have that rubric, right? It's not just, sentiment is negative with a 0.25 million. I don't know where that 0.25
Correct.
came
Yeah.
from.
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things, again, I was reflecting with some another guest, was when we ask LLM to give us a confidence, it gives a number like 25, 75, but there is no reason for us to believe that the transformer model and how the way it works, there is no reason for us to believe that that number is coming out of anything scientific or
Exactly. Yeah.
any statistical thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, this totally resonates with me. Okay, so let's get into RAG now. So how would you explain RAG in plain English? So some of our listeners know what RAG is. RAG stands for Retrieval-Augmented Generation, and this is a workhorse of a lot of applications that we use using generative AI. And some of the audience might not know what RAG is. So maybe let's very simple terms describe what RAG is.
Yeah, absolutely. So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So that probably doesn't help too much, but really is think of RAG or Retrieval Augmented Generation. Think of that as a chat box. You want to ask questions and get answers, right? So the whole premise with RAG is that it can actually use a set of data as its ground truth, right? So for a lot of people today, when you talk to ChatGPT or Copilot, you're not actually sure where that data comes from, because sometimes the model itself has that knowledge. Sometimes it's using a web search, so it's not 100% certain. But with RAG, if you just look at it from a traditional pattern perspective, so RAG would imply that you're going to collect a set of data that could be from the enterprise, but you have full control of that data, and then you actually want to, based on what the question is, you want to retrieve the most relevant parts of that data, and then the only task for the model is to answer the question based on the data that's retrieved, right? So that's the augmented generation part, is that you're generating the response, but you're augmenting the generation with the retrieved data that's the most relevant. And then the idea is that when you retrieve the most relevant data, the answer should be somewhere there, right? So you're not actually using the model to actually answer the question. You're making the model basically take the retrieved data and get the answer from that data.
That's awesome. And it comes from like retrieval or information retrieval. Like I did some courses with Chris Manning. He's like the master professor from Stanford at information retrieval. And I think of retrieval as the Google problem, right? Like 10 blue links. You have
Yep.
a lot of documents in your database, and your goal based on a search query, like give me the document related to how to process this invoice or something like that, is to identify the best 10 blue links. And this was the retrieval was the problem of the decade for maybe the early 2000s, right? Like that was the information, and that was solved by Google, right? Like it's a retrieval was that
Yes.
10 blue link. And you can think of that retrieval as also a search, like at a Google scale, it's a 10 blue link problem. In an organization that you have, it's just similar to like a search in your SharePoint, right? Like you have all the documents and how to process an invoice, and you find the top 10 links. And if the top 10 links are good, or top 3 links are good, right? Like Google wants to have an answer in top 3, like that. If your search is good, that top 3, you get an answer, so much value add, right? Like you can just put all your documents and people are doing that retrieval. And then the generation part, like what we are talking about, I think of it as a chat GPT almost. And chat GPT is like processing all the documents that are available, and it's just keeping it in model weights, but it has read not just your FAQ, but it has read FAQ for everyone. So when you ask it a question, you don't know whether it's coming from the FAQ of you or from somebody else. But it's great because it can give you an answer rather than a document. So this retrieval and generation, what if we combine those two? Right, like that's what you're talking about, where we first do the retrieval. So you get your traditional search, get your top 10 documents, and then give them to the chat. Think of almost like, I almost think of it like copy paste those 10 documents content to chat GPT and say, okay, these are the 10 documents. This is my question. See if there is an answer in this question. And if there is no answer, say that there is no answer. Don't make up an answer based on what you have read before or something. It has to be in here, right? Like, and if that, like that pattern then starts becoming very useful, because now you can say that, oh, I only want answers within this corpus, within this context. Or even like sometimes, even if there are general purpose questions like how many moons does Jupiter have or something, maybe that large language model was trained in 2024 last, but maybe some new, like, so the new data has come in, so it doesn't know that answer, but like with this RAG you can give these kind of an answer. Yeah, that's cool. So hopefully that gives the viewer some understanding and idea about this retrieval augmented generation. It's a very standard process. Hubert, I'm sure, uses it a lot in many businesses and many public sectors. So that's great. That's the positive of retrieval augmented generation. It takes this Google style search and it takes GenAI and it combines the two and gives you an answer based on your data. That's great. But what are some common failure modes? What are the things you have seen in either pilots or POCs or production systems where it fails?
Yeah, I work quite a bit with Canadian public sector on implementing RAG into production. And, this is actually something I get this question asked a lot. So usually you don't do RAG for the sake of doing RAG. You do it as part of kind of a chatbot or kind of a chat interface, right? So when end users kind of test it out, they just want to ask a question and you get the answer back, right? So a lot of times the ways I see RAG fail is questions like, hello, how are you? Like small talk, right? Because you don't, right? So you want to kind of, have the model have flexibility so that small talk, you can enable it to a point where, yes, you still implement RAG, but it should still allow kind of the small talk part to continue. To what extent, customers kind of have to control for that, but just recognizing that, RAG actually would not do very well with small talk because by definition, because if you say, how are you? Now the model's confused. Oh, I like, who am I? What information?
There is no document that gives that answer. Exactly. So what?
That's a challenge. But you can easily control for that through your system prompting. Another part is hallucination, right? So if you ask a question and then, at face value, based on RAG, if it doesn't answer the right question, right? So a lot of times people automatically think, oh, it's the model, it's hallucinating, AI is bad. But when we look at the reason, what we do is we kind of debug it, right? So we take that question and then we try to find, using the same retrieval engine, to what are the most relevant documents based on that question. And if the answer is not there, then how would you expect the model to answer it, because you don't have the right data, right? So, when I approach it, right, I never just look at hallucination just for the sake of hallucination. I look at it as, are you retrieving the right documents first? And then also, is your question answerable from those documents, right? So if it's not, then are you actually retrieving the right documents? If you are, then, maybe that question is actually out of scope, right? So what I like to do is I like to kind of unpack hallucination and look at actually what is driving like incorrect answer, right? And a lot of times what I found with our customers is actually because the retrieval part is not theirs, right? So they do have the right answer somewhere, it's just the retrieval part is not. So like one example I'll give, and it kind of speaks to what could go wrong, is, I work with the public sector in the federal space where they have documents which are actually time spent by publication date. So they have documents which are, say produced every year, right? So when we do a retrieval, I can say like, what's the population of Ottawa? And just from that, I can retrieve some information from 2019. I can get it from like 1980. But the model, like, there's no context on the current date. So it'll actually just answer, say, oh, the population of, 1989 is 600,000 people in Ottawa, which may be correct that time, and it answers the question, but everyone's gonna say, hey, this is a dumb chatbot because why are you giving an answer that's 40 years old, right? And then so now we say, okay, this is actually, it's not a hallucination problem because it's the correct answer. Your data is actually correct, but we're not retrieving actually the most relevant, because even if the user doesn't ask for the date that's more recent, that should be implied. So we have to ask some sort of business logic, right? Like what we call Azure, we call that a scoring profile. So we have to sort the relevance based on recency, right? So now there's an automatic way where you can retrieve the most relevant data, now you can also sort it, kind of, retrieve it in the right order based on time, right? So now, as soon as we implemented that, this customer was easily able to get, population Ottawa, which is the most recent, and that I definitely
Okay.
they like that a lot more than before scoring profiles.
I think that's a beautiful example and very well put. So let me see if I can rephrase and make sure I understand what you're saying. So the for type of failures you showed were four. So for the first one was small talk, and whenever you're doing hi, hello, how are you, we want the chatbot to be conversational.
Yes.
But the RAG system, we are also forcing the chatbot to say no, only answer within the document. So you cannot do both. So that causes some
Yes.
issues. Can be solved with better prompting and all, but that's one sort of issues. The small talk and being conversational issues. The second one that you talked about is hallucination, and hallucination is this big bad word where sometimes ChatGPT gives a wrong answer, like 3 hours in strawberries and that kind of stuff. And what we think is that we have given the right context to the generative AI model, but it still gives a wrong answer, and that can happen. And that's what we'll call hallucination specifically, or giving an answer that is not grounded. And you think that that gets blamed for some the other two failures, and the other two failures, the third one is, what if you actually could not do the search properly and you did not give the right search documents to the chatbot, so then it can't answer. So like in Google, like if you do a search and you didn't get something in the top 10, then too bad, right? Like you don't get that answer. So the answer is like somehow the search algorithm didn't work very well. So that's the third kind of problem. And then the fourth one that you said is that the search kind of worked okay in its own context. The LLM did it okay in its own context, but the two of them together, there was a gap. So like if you had searched for what is the population of like in Alberta or something, and a human would have seen like 10 blue links, and they would have clicked on the first link, and then they say that in 2015 the population is 60,000, right? And the human would have known that yeah, this is 2015, so I understand that this search is fine, so let me go to the second document, because human knows that context of going. And what you're saying is that sometimes if there is this like things falling in the middle of retrieval and generation, where retrieval is doing its own thing, generation is doing its own thing, but that context is not properly passed. So that's the fourth kind of failure, and those very, very good example that you have about highlighting that fourth kind of failure, which is like, yeah, some older documents which are fine in your search, but you need to give more context. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, like common sense too, right? Like it's
common
it's
sense.
actually
Totally.
it's not a trivial thing to give AI that type of common sense. Yeah, so
I totally agree. And this is just one example that you give, but this is a pattern of problem that we see everywhere, where like the data scientist, like let's say we have two people, one working on search, he's saying, I'm giving the right search, like it's giving the top 10 documents fine, right? And the person who is looking at the LLM and whether it's hallucinating, it's saying, no, it got the context, it gave the answer, it was in the context, but the context was not sufficiently provided. So it's somewhere in the middle. That's beautiful. Okay, so that example now brings us to, let's get into the solutions on. So at a high level, what are the core failure mode? We talked about them. When people try to improve RAG systems, so you have this failure. Now, how do you how do you go about fixing it? What is your process of dealing with creating RAG systems that are dealing with all these kinds of failures?
yeah, absolutely. So the way I like to kind of improve and address issues and kind of deal with failures is I look at it from retrieval augmented generation part, right? So I focus in on the retrieval part. So I want to find the most relevant documents, right? So what that means is if I have a question, I have to first ensure that my documents are managed correctly. So in terms of, I can't just retrieve, so if I have a bunch of PDFs, I actually want to make sure that they're actually small enough so that each part of the document is kind of, sizable. So it can actually live by itself, right? But I don't want to bring like a massive, 200-page document because now the AI is gonna kind of reason over like 200 pages, and that's actually quite expensive, but also it's not as accurate. That's another kind of discussion. But so there has to be a kind of a way for me to organize my document into like meaningful chunks, right? So that's called chunking, where you actually want to kind of break down your documents into like sections or bodies, so that the answer could be found in one of those sections. So you kind of balance the context window with retrieval accuracy. The second part is you want to optimize the retrieval part based on so there's different ways you can retrieve. So you can use keyword search, where you're just finding the most specific words. You can use semantic search, which applies some sort of meaning behind the search. And now, obviously, with probably some of your listeners, they're familiar with something called vector search, where you're basically converting text into mathematical arrays, and that's actually been found to be quite accurate. And then the combination of using a number of these types of search techniques is called hybrid search, and that's actually even better. So being able to retrieve the most relevant documents based on this optimized retrieval technique is going to be quite good. And then so that's a retrieval part. And then now when we look at augmented generation, we also have to, deal with, letting it continue with small talk. So that's important. You also want to ensure that only questions which are relevant to the set of documents you have is answered. So for example, if I'm talking about FIFA and kind of soccer, I don't want it to answer about basketball or hockey. So I have, in the prompt engineering, you want to be clear that they say, hey, my documents are only related to FIFA and soccer. So, don't answer any questions about basketball or hockey, right? So that has to be very clear, because otherwise the model is going to try to answer a question based on the documents. But so if all the documents are about soccer and you're asking about hockey, if you allow it to answer about hockey, first it might use its own internal knowledge, which could be outdated, or that's a potential where it could make up some answers. And then a lot of times, when you have a lot of documents in the reg, you actually don't know what information is actually answerable from your document. So I've actually had examples where they'll ask a random question, and then in the customer's document, that answer is actually found, but it's very old, right? So you can have accidental answers which are actually in the document. So it's actually a correct realization of reg, but it's not actually not intended. So that's why having prompting to actually get, have very clear scope on what you can and cannot answer, that would be very helpful. And then what I've seen now with some of our customers is post generation, they may do another kind of evaluation, right? So they may have another model that would evaluate the answer based on the document, just to have kind of a second eye
A
to verify,
judge.
right? So those are, definitely ways that
Some patterns.
people can identify issues, but also to improve reg based systems.
Perfect. I think that covers so many really cool ideas. So what you said is that the documents that go into your retrieval system, your database of all the documents, need to be the right documents, because sometimes they can be outdated documents and then too bad, right? Like you get a wrong answer, RAG is working as designed, but you get a wrong answer. So doing a QA on what documents go inside that system, that's one, and keeping in mind on them. Second is, you said chunk the documents the right size. Sometimes the chunks can be too big. And then these days with large language models, they say that they have a lot of memory, so they can take a 100-page document or something. But that doesn't mean that they do an accurate job using that data. So having the right size chunks, and you mentioned that do the chunks logically. So if a document has sections, maybe each section is a chunk. So it's like a logical way of chunking rather than just randomly taking 50 words and then chunking it. Do it more logically. So that was the second tip that I got from you, and like focus on doing all these steps right. And then the third is small talk. You can do some prompt engineering to make sure it flows smoothly, but at the same time, it knows its context. So you gave an example of hockey and FIFA, and like whatever. If your context is only answer questions that are related to my organization, and that's all. If somebody is asking general scientific questions or something, don't. So small talk is fine, but still limit the boundaries. So that was the other thing that you said. And then the last thing you said was giving appropriate. In spite of doing all of these right, there are still will be chances where RAG might not get the right context. It might not know the previous year, like you said, or there might be some other things. Like there are more prompting and more testing that needs to be done to see if, in spite of all of this, does RAG have any questions, or are there any chances that something is falling through the cracks?
Yeah, actually, sorry, if I may, I'll just add one more, which I think is also quite important, because reg doesn't solve all types of questions, right? So when you look at questions which are like aggregations, and you're saying, like a very classic example is you got a bunch of documents, and the question could be, how many times is the word Hubert mentioned in my document? So reg's going to retrieve your top in, right? The top number, but it's not all your documents. So it's but it's going to answer based on the retrieve documents. Oh, it's mentioned 20 times, but that's definitely not the right answer, right? So looking at, there's just some certain types of questions that just cannot be answered by reg. So recognizing that is going to be important.
Limitation of RAG. Yeah. So you mentioned recognizing the limitation of RAG, and then you mentioned for the last part where, in spite of that, there is something that RAG can go do wrong, and you said there is one idea that people do is having almost like a black box test done automatically by AI. So one AI is generating an answer, and second AI is queuing that answer real time or near real time, something like that, where the second AI says, okay, I looked at this input, I looked at you give the AI context to, I guess, the second AI, the judge AI. You give the context to, and then you give an answer, and think like the goal of that AI, the prompt for that AI is to identify if there are any failure modes that you can see where this answer can be wrong. And then based on what the output of that judge AI is, you determine whether to give that answer out to the user or to tell the user that, sorry, talk to a human agent, something like that.
Exactly.
Perfect. Awesome. That covers a lot of best practices of RAG system. So now wanted to maybe tap on your experience on scaling systems. And this can be a RAG system, or it can be any AI system. And many times AI is thought to be, right now, like the GenAI is thought to be a cool demo or a cool pilot, but when it goes to production, then there are some issues that come up. So how to take an AI from a cool prototype, cool pilot that is, wow, this is really nice, to no, actually it's generating value for my customers. So what all things to keep in mind to make AI public?
So I would say that's a great question. So that, I do a lot of my time is actually spent with our customers going from prototype to production. So, I would say almost anyone, company can build a proof of concept with AI type of solution, right? There's GitHub repos, you can even do vibe coding now and kind of build it with an AI assistant. But generally, like to take it to production, like you have to anchor the value of AI on some sort of efficiency gain or operational efficiency, productivity gain. There has to be some metric, right? So as part of the pilot to production, I always, work with our customers to really have a concrete definition of success, right? So you say, okay, and what the target of AI is, right? So if we're doing, a good example is, so I'm just referring to the wildfire prediction engine by Alberta, right? Their metric, obviously, everyone understands the importance of wildfire, but like if we look at it from operational efficiency perspective, the way I thought of it was, so what happens without AI is, with the wildfire example is, people would have to kind of review their data and actually pick different regions within the province to allocate their resourcing, their people, money, resources to. And if they pick wrong, then they're kind of wasting their time, right? Because this one region didn't have a fire or has a smaller fire than expected, right? So there's a opportunity cost, and that's actually a very tangible value there in terms of, time spent, people's time, fuel, vehicles. They're very monetary, tangible value there. So now if you use AI and say, hey, we can actually optimize because we can kind of predict which regions have fires, then they can actually address by having more people be in regions that have higher likelihood of fire start, so that there's a less chance of them being in places where they're kind of not being utilized, right? So the expected value is actually can be calculated, and then so you want your AI to actually have a higher expected value in terms of money, resourcing, what have you, versus if we don't use AI, right? But the calculating that expected value, and what I say expected value, I actually mean like E of X, where it's literally the mathematical kind of expected value of AI, and then you want that to be higher than if you don't use AI, right? So there's actually a number of calculations you would do, and I actually do a lot of my work actually is to kind of build that business case so that there's enough value, expected value there to actually go to production, right? Because if you think about AI, first of all, AI is not cheap. There's lots of GPUs that you need, so there's actually a cost to operationalize artificial intelligence, right? So you have to make sure that you come with the expected value of AI, and that should be higher than the cost, and then you have that's where you get your productivity gain.
Very nice. So focus on the business case and the right metrics and not just the technical part of AI.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, perfect. So any other general advice, if there is a new team in public sector who is
Right.
doing their first foray into doing a rack system and deploying a rack system, you've given a lot of advice already. Any other things that you want to mention to them to set them up for long-term success?
To be frank, I have this conversation a lot, and one thing about public sector is sometimes decision makers and others could be a bit more risk averse,
Sure.
right? And then so like there's very clear recognition that AI, regardless of what you do, it's not going to be deterministic, right? That's just by nature, and lots of technologies are not deterministic, right? So
True.
it's really about risk minimization, not a risk elimination, right? So it's not possible a lot of times to operationalize AI with a 0% chance of risk of. So the way I always think about it is like
Very
you want
nice.
to, apply your responsible AI principles. You want to apply your privacy, security first standards and best practices. But also, end of the day, is like there is some sort of risk you got to take on with this AI. Is that when you augment it with human intelligence, and to use AI for humans to be able to optimize efficiency gains, productivity gains, that those benefits vastly outweigh the small risk that you're going to encounter, right? So you want to minimize risk, but
Beautiful.
really put it in the hands of your humans so that they can actually do the best work.
Very good. What I got from it is, one, recognize that in spite of all the fantastic advice Hubert has given from the ground, there is always a chance that the rack can still go wrong, right? Like a
Exactly.
judge and everything, right? Chunking, everything is done. There is always a chance. So have that in the back of your mind, and using all those responsible AI principles with the human in the loop, using it in the right context, all of that is very important.
Yes.
Fantastic. Very, very nice way to sum up the scaling rack system section. Okay, so we are coming to the close. So we're going to do a lightning round and get some of your predictions and some quick answers that first come to you. So one bold prediction you have for AI in public sector tech, maybe in the next 2 years
Yeah,
or 4 years,
I
five
think,
years,
yeah,
whichever?
yeah,
Yeah.
I would say agent to agent communication. I think, that's a big bet that, Microsoft, we've
Microsoft is
spoke
making. Yeah.
to, most of our competitors and just the AI tech industry. But I think, what my bold prediction is, we're going to build out, a public sector centric agent to agent kind of framework that may differ from commercial, right? Because if you think about it with agentic AI, like you're in the commercial side, there's, people are thinking about advertisements, how you commercialize it. So like the business case for public sector is not the same. I don't know if I have a bold specific prediction, but I think I want to kind of, help contribute to some sort of kind of framework about agentic AI, agent to agent communication that's, really beneficial for public sector. So that I think that's something that I'm excited about.
I really like that. So you're thinking each public sector entity would have an agent which almost is like their storefront or
Yeah,
their website, right?
yeah,
And then
exactly.
other public sector has another one, and then let's say one has to talk to another, like one agent needs to know some things within the jurisdiction of another. Then these two agents can talk and figure things out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And then it's just that the building it, we got to figure out the public sector business model, right? Because on
totally.
the commercial side, it's monetary, right? But public
Yeah,
sector is not, right? So we got to figure out, why do we want agents to talk to agents in public sector, right? Like there's
I
lots
can
of benefits,
certainly
but
see as so many.
we got to figure that out, right? Yeah.
This is such a great idea and like fantastic initiative. So very inspiring. Okay, what common ways public sector teams think about AI that you think needs a gentle shake or some like they need to think of it differently?
I think, I always go back to is just the risk minimization part, right? It's
Mm,
just in public sector, I go through this a lot with federal. We have the authority to operate. You have these security assessments. Like there's a way where a lot of people think, you can just have 0% risk when it comes to AI, but it's just, with the way AI is designed, implemented, and there's lots of technologies are like that, right? Like vehicles, airplanes, like anything, right? It's just you got to minimize the risk, right? So just I think that framework about risk minimization instead of elimination, I think that's definitely something I'm
okay.
working with my customers on. Yeah.
Beautiful. Many times we technical people, we work on some problems which are pretty standard, like sentiment and classifying
No.
sentiments for tweets and code, or doing some standard classifications and things like that. And then there are some problems, like a few of us, like maybe 10-20% of our time, we are focused on like doing something really cool, right? Is there any technical or the other problem that you're like obsessed about and you're focused on and you want to crack?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'll give a bit of a kind of a plug. So I think for this summer, I really want to build out an implementation of agent to agent communication. And then what I found is, Databricks has Genie, which is their agent, right? So
Right.
my joke is, I can build two agents, two
Uh-huh.
crappy agents that talk to each other. But what's probably better is, a world class organization like Databricks, they've
Hmm.
invested a lot with their agent Genie. So let's talk to a properly built agent, which is Genie. And so I want to kind of my kind of bold take this summer is I want to build a pretty compelling A to A framework that I can figure out how to talk to Genie correctly through an agent, and then so then I can kind of get that
Wow.
Databricks agentic AI communication going, right? Whether it's MCP or a different protocol,
I
we'll
see.
see. But I
What
want to get that figured out.
very nice. Very inspiring. This might be the first time I'm hearing A to A. I'm sure I'm going to hear more about it. So, like B2B, business to business, B2C. This is A to A, agent to agent. Pretty cool. And that's a very inspiring project.
You heard Microsoft at Build, right? It's definitely something we're definitely going big on, but it's super new, right? So a lot of the frameworks, the patterns are really to be established. I just think with the Databricks Genie, there is a very capable agent on the other
Mhm.
side that it's got an API. We can talk to it. So I want to kind of figure out how to do that.
Very inspiring. More power to you. Okay, last question today. If you weren't doing AI, what are your other interests? What would you be doing instead?
Yeah, that's I thought about, but I'm gonna kind of give a boring example there. But so when I was studying in university, I actually did pure math. So I think if I didn't if I didn't do co-op and work in the national defense with data mining, I think I would actually continue theoretical research. So I'd probably be doing a PhD and maybe be a professor by now. So but I'm happy. I was definitely won over by AI and applying AI in practical settings. So I'm definitely happy where I am. But I think I would most likely I was probably gonna kind of a research path. Yeah.
Well, the public sector Canada field is very lucky that you did not become a professor, but you
Thank
are
you.
working with us. And I personally have a lot of joy working with you and discussing some of the cool
Yeah.
problems that we work on. So thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much for sharing a lot of insights that come from going into the details, like getting your hands dirty and working into the details. So it's very valuable. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Gurish. And just likewise, like it's such an honor to be on this podcast, being able to work as a top talent with you, such a top talent in Canada, and super inspiring. And I learn a lot from you every day. So thank you, Gurish. It's such an honor to be here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right.
This was govai.fm. Connect with us on LinkedIn, suggest a guest, and stay tuned for real stories from AI in action.